I will be publishing a blog post this week that will summarize some of my bond, stock, and stock fund trades since I last published two posts discussing those kind of trades on February 10th, 2025. The discussion will be of a few corporate bond purchases and only stock sales. Even when I am in a crawl mode as now, waiting for more information to make investment decisions, I will have over 50 trades in a month. Stocks have not declined sufficiently for me to buy much of anything yet. Today, with the market rising slightly early in the morning, I am likely to sell something if the market turns up. I still own 200 to 250 common stocks. I never count them. But the allocation percentage is about 8% now of the total dollar amount held in my brokerage accounts. I'm closely tracking information relating to consumer spending in the United States and view this as probably the most important economic data that now exists and needs to be monitored constantly. This has become even more critical information than usual in making investment decisions since there is evidence indicating that spending is slowing down and will be significantly less supportive of GDP growth in 2025 than in the prior 3 years, and may slow sufficiently later this year to cause a U.S. recession. There is not enough data yet, for me at least, to predict with confidence that a recession is likely to happen this year or in 2026. The odds of one occurring within the next 18 months or so have meaningfully increased in the 2025 first quarter, and I am expecting now those odds to increase further as the year progresses, based primarily on policy changes made in Washington, continued increases in inflation, significant job layoffs in both the corporate and private sectors, as well as, of course, the U.S. government, and importantly, the conditions in existence prior to Trump becoming president, which includes the high level of inflation numbers in the 2021 through 2023 that squeezed the bottom three quintiles in household income substantially, and high levels of very expensive credit card debt among lower and middle income households. The government reported earlier today that retail sales in February rose 0.2% compared to January, with the consensus forecast at 0.6%. The government revised the January retail numbers to a negative 1.2% in January. So retail sales are down so far in January and February of 2025. The stock market is currently taking this report in stride, though some early gains have vanished already, and is assigning this kind of information about consumer spending as having no predictive value when assessing price multiples for stocks, which was also the case last Friday when the University of Michigan reported another plunge in consumer sentiment. This is a head in the sand approach which may continue until the stock jocks are doused with buckets of ice cold water with data that is inconsistent with the current optimistic forecast and can no longer be ignored, or possibly the nonchalant attitude now indicates a future prediction which is at least possible and that it may happen. that consumer spending will rebound with better weather and that the Trump tariff war will be at worst temporary in time. The natural optimism of stock investors is difficult to change into pessimism about the future, which has been my experience in observing them for 5 decades or six, as I have. But when the attitude becomes pessimistic, the stock jocks have a tendency to price uh, stocks as if the bad times are bad and will never get better again. Like in 1982, the potential long-term annual stock returns could be staggering, with purchases made during the summer of 1982 when the stock market had bottomed in July of 1982 after a 16-year or so bear market in stocks. And that resulted in 15 plus percent annual average total returns in the S&P 500, adjusted down by inflation starting in August 1982 through March 2000. In the retail sales report released this morning, restaurant sales declined by 1.5%, which may be a leading indicator of belt tightening among consumers as more forego this discretionary expense in favor of eating at home. This data needs to be tracked closely in the coming months. Auto and truck sales for the second month in a row declined. Autos account for about 1/5 of retail sales, and the recently applied Trump tariff taxes on all steel and aluminum imports will substantially drive up the price of new vehicles once the existing pre-tariff inventory of auto companies is used in manufacturing. This will cause a major decline in auto sales that would be made far worse by Trump violating the USMCA agreement that he negotiated and signed, which he has threatened to do by imposing 25% tariffs on all car, truck, uh, uh, and their component parts imported from Mexico and Canada. The end result of all those tariffs, when implemented, will be major layoffs by the auto companies and the companies that supply them with parts as consumers simply quit buying new vehicles in the same percentages as they had bought in the prior to the tariff increases. For households that are financially stressed already with significant debt servicing obligations ranging from home mortgages to credit card debt, continuing non-essential purchases now is probably a very risky gamble that there will not be a recession on the near horizon and that inflation will not reignite higher later this year and into 2026. I have never had credit card debt since I first acquired a credit card in 1976. I did not have much money in savings back then, but I was not about to borrow money at credit card interest rates to buy anything. So if I could not pay a credit card bill in full at the end of a billing cycle if I purchased more stuff, I simply would not make those purchases. Even as I have become well off financially, I do not make any unnecessary purchases most of the time. I do slide into them occasionally. For example, I have not bought a new car since 2007, since the two that I currently own work just fine, though I may have to spend 1,000 to 2,000 every 3 years or so on both to keep them operational. One of my cars is a mint-condition 1987 Mercedes 260E, pampered substantially since purchase. It did cost me about 2,500 or so last year to replace 2 brake discs and 4 brake pads. This is not an inexpensive way to repair a Mercedes that is that old. I will take a photo of that car in my next blog post. The other vehicle is a 2000 Saturn Aura. I've never bought a car using credit. I paid cash to build my home in 1982 and purchased that year a new Volvo using cash, which I had saved and invested mostly in yielding CDs and some stocks starting in the mid 1970s through 1981 when interest rates topped out over 15% for a 3-month CD. Another issue that will negatively impact discretionary consumer spending is the rapid increases in prices for non-discretionary purchases. I mentioned in my last video the huge increases in my home, umbrella, and car insurance premium last year, even though I had had no claims. If I was financially stressed, money used to pay those increases would simply not be available for any discretionary purchases. The same is true for my heating bill this winter, which has skyrocketed because of the unusually cold weather here in Tennessee. And that was after I adjusted the thermostat down by 2 or 3, or sometimes even 4 degrees and put on an extra layer of clothing, which I'm wearing now. That money is just gone and is not available for discretionary purchases. So everybody is not as well off, which sometimes the stock jocks seem to forget, as they are. The top 10% are still mostly probably doing just fine, but that is not the case for most everybody else.